This is the Jim Nog Pod with Jim Noguera. It is the Jim Nog Pod with Jim Noguera.
Most interested man
It is the
in the
Jim
world.
Nog
Interested,
Pod with Jim Noguera.
the most interested man
Jim
in the
Noguera. Jim Nog
world.
Pod.
Interested,
It is the Jim
interested.
in the world.
Welcome to the pod. This is James Noguera, aka Jim Nog. On this episode, Layla Merritt. Layla is a multi-faceted creator. She studied screenwriting in the Harlem Dramatic Writing Workshop at Columbia University and literature at the University of Michigan and the City College of New York. Her style is often dark comedy, imbued with themes of personal and systemic oppression. She sees her work in the emerging genre of psychologically disturbing comedies, like films from Jordan Peele and Bong Joon. She has published short fiction and written, directed, and produced off-Broadway theater. We discuss dealing with criticism, the MFA experience, her award-winning screenplay titled Baby Teeth, duality in literature, Gino Diaz, and much more. And now, Layla Merritt. Welcome to the podcast, the Jim Nog Pod. I'm joined with Layla Merritt. We kind of know each other. We were classmates at one time. We took, at the very least, we took a fiction workshop together. I remember that. Taught by Mark Mirsky at City College. To me, what's interesting about talking about the MFA the experience with writers is like what they got out of it, and just like, you know, overall for people who want to become writers, I think a lot of them think about, you know, if they want to pursue an MFA. And I know that for me, it was really rewarding, like to first off, Mirsky really, you know, kicked my butt. He really forced me to write a lot, and I really, you know, appreciate that. You know, I was creating new stories from scratch. It was not easy. I think I wrote more for that class than any other course before that. And you know, there are some tough things about the MFA experience. You know, criticism, especially from the professor, you know, like that's difficult. And so, you know, I guess there's an art to doing that. I had Professor Mark Mirsky, and I also had Professor Lindsay Abrams, who was my my thesis advisor, and they're very different because I don't know, their approach is different. I mean, they're both great, and their personalities might work with different people, and so it was interesting having both of them. And so yes, one maybe was more critical of my work, which is definitely, I think, needed from time to time, and one was more complimentary of my work. And so I think that's an interesting question that I would like to ask you, because it's something that people should definitely be mindful of if they're going to go into an MFA program. Is you're going to have other people look at your work and potentially criticize it. And some people are not the best at how they communicate the criticisms. And so I'm curious what you think about that, about criticism during an MFA experience, and if you've had any experience with that, and like, what would you say about writers who maybe are maybe where that would be a concern that they would have going into a MFA program?
That they will be criticized?
Yeah, that their work would be criticized, and you know, this is the thing that they care about, that they think they're really good at, and someone might say, you know, this is you know, really bad.
Yeah, it's worse. Like when they say it's really bad, that's normal. You know, what bothers me is when they act like it's like so disgusting they couldn't even read it. that kind of, you know, is a little irritating for me. And that happened with people in the MFA program when they would read my work. So yeah, I mean, what would I say? I would say, like, I still workshop all the time. You know, I'm still constantly getting feedback on my work. It's critical to get feedback on your work. And so the first class that I took in the program was with James McElroy. I don't know if you knew him, but he wasn't a faculty. He was like kind of retired, and adjunct. And but he was really great, and he was very old. And so he had, you know, how like older professors kind of have a similar style in terms of rules. And, you know, they just don't have patience for a lot of whimsical, fancy kind of stuff, like Mirsky as well. So McElroy, though, I really appreciated that he eviscerated my work. I didn't appreciate it at first, okay? And it was surprising because the first thing I brought in, I had people in the class act like they were disgusted to read it because it was written in a dialect. And I just had people in the class, just, you know, this one woman in particular, she acted like, it just left an impression. I kind of hated her after a little bit. And McElroy really like praised it. The ambition to carry something that long with that kind of dialect and like follow it through, whatever. And so, yeah, it's whatever. But then I wrote this other piece that I thought was so much better. I thought it was just on another plane. I thought it was genius. And there was no dialect or anything like that. It was more of the macro aspect of it that I thought was smart. Anyway, he eviscerated it. Oh, he called it junk. Oh, it was sentimental nonsense. It was an artistic fantasy. It was junk. It was throw it out. It was this, it was that. Oh, throw it away and get your other piece. And I was just like more, you know, horrified. And I thought he was so mean or whatever.
Yep.
But, you know, later, obviously, I completely saw what he was talking about. And I appreciated every word that he had said that was like to the point. Because unfortunately, I think that like novice writers, in the words of Erykah Badu, you know, I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my shit. So it's so important that they like can be sensitive, and you can't be sensitive about your work. You have to be willing to make edits, and you can't be attached to something because you wrote it. You know, one of my mentors says, like, don't cannibalize your own work. If you wrote something a few years ago and now you're writing something else, don't take that old thing and put it in your new thing, right? He says, just write from scratch and just let it flow out now. So like, so yeah, I think that if you want to write, getting feedback is important. Sometimes, I guess it depends on where you are. Like in the very beginning, you just want feedback to encourage you, right? To help you feel like maybe you're going in a good direction and just help you kind of unlock some of your creativity and let that channel out, And later you may be looking for deeper things and need people who have like hardline experience with writing and like how things can like flow versus people who may be like really adept with recognizing themes and helping like tie things together in that way. So there's different ways to get feedback, but it's always tough, because like even when you're giving feedback, like because I appreciated McElroy's approach, I kind of give that out as well. And people have gotten really mad at me. They've hated me. They've gotten very angry with me. I take it personal, and it's never personal.
So one thing that I was thinking about as you're talking is that I also like really like not negative necessarily criticism, but or negative feedback, but constructive things that I can improve upon. Like my mind gravitates more to that than the other things, than the positive stuff, because usually the criticism, the things that you're getting wrong, usually for me at least, I have found that criticism tends to be better. It tends to be more detailed. When people like your work, they tend not to be super specific. Like, I like that, this is good, or maybe I really like the scene, this is great, maybe write a little bit more about this. But I found that I really like the constructive criticism. I really like that. But I think there's a way probably to do it, right? I'm not saying that I know exactly what that is, and I don't know if you have a strong opinion about that, but it probably involves, like some sort of like a compliment sandwich, where you have like the compliment, and then you have like the criticism, and then you have like another compliment. Some people say like that's the best way to give constructive criticism. I agree. You don't want to make it personal, right? You want to make it obvious that you're talking about the work. And I think that's an important distinction. You want to make it so that there's something specific and, of course, subjective that you feel the writer can fix. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it reminds me of like Larry Bird. No, not Larry Bird. Phil Jackson. And Phil Jackson used to coach Kobe Bryant, and before he could criticize Kobe Bryant, he would have to give him like 5 massive compliments. Like before Kobe Bryant would accept any sort of criticism, because the ego's so big. And that is basically, what you have to do for people to soften up, because the natural reflex to criticism is, to harden up and to not let it in. And, it's one of the great faults of humanity. But yeah, I agree. There's this workshop that I used to do, and the instructor, the way she would do it was she always would start with warm feedback. Let's hear warm feedback from the room, right? That's when people get, oh, I like this. This is really cute. This reminds, whatever. Okay, great. Now let's get to the real feedback, right? And so that was a good way, I think, to start it. Everybody gets several compliments and things about their work that excited people before getting to the things that confused people or stirred some type of emotion. So I think that's a good approach.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, like if you like, it gets annoying to me personally to sit in a workshop with a ton, like if it's a large workshop and you have to sit there and everyone's like afraid to criticize. I'm just like, I need to, this is so like, it's like a waste of time. Like, can I get to mine and just leave? Because I know it may sound impatient or whatever, like, but I'm not there to just like exchange pleasantries for hours on end. Like I've been to workshops that last 6 hours. And it's like, if I'm going to be there during that kind of time, I know I personally want some real criticism. Like if you hate it, tell me you hate it. Tell me what you hate about it. Because I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like if someone hates something I wrote, it's so much better than if they don't have an opinion or they're like, oh, it's good. Like, you know, that makes me feel like, wow, I did something. Like, you don't have to like it, but if it makes you feel strongly, then there's like potential I can work with something there. Like,
Yeah.
So I don't really take it like, I don't think that like students should take it as a sign if people don't like their work, as long as like there's an emotional reason why they don't like it. If they don't like it because it's so difficult to read, like it's just, you know, the person didn't put effort into the presentation and then they expect someone else to read that. And I usually just stop. Like it's hard because I feel like if you want me to take my time to read something that's not ready and put my energy into it, at least make sure that it's presented in a reasonably professional way. So yeah, so I think that if people can't like handle a criticism from like an editing workshop or writer's workshop, which is really just editing and stuff like that, then you know maybe writing is just too scary. Writing doesn't seem like it's scary. Like, oh, writing's scary, but it's scary as fuck. So like it's really scary actually. If you're writing nonfiction, I don't think it's as scary, but writing fiction is super scary.
Mhm.
And it's an art form that requires a lot of solitude. And maybe that's another reason why people are so sensitive. But I think the best thing ever is when you really get it through your head that you don't need all that stuff on the page. You don't need to say, you know, like figuring out the really clean way to say things is one of the greatest gifts you can get as a writer when it, you know, really clicks and your writing becomes like very clean.
It's hard, but if you make it out, it's rewarding. If you're not too sensitive about it, and it hurts for sure. You know, especially from the professor. I think if you're a professor of creative writing, you have to be tactful, certainly, because of your position, you know, in terms of what you say to students. So, yeah. So what you said reminded me of, I'm not an expert on this theory, but Hemingway's iceberg theory. I don't know if you're familiar with that, right? But the idea is like the iceberg. What we see of an iceberg, right, is like the topmost, you know, part that's visible, but like under the water, right, is the vast bulk of the iceberg. So the idea is like the more you take out, the stronger the story is. I mean, I think I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but you know, the idea is that, you know, you're cutting the fat, basically, you know, and that's, you know, regarding the language, regarding the, even, you know, the plot and stuff like that. And that's really helped me to be a better writer. You know, there's, especially in terms of plot, I have found that it's very counterintuitive, but the more you take out that you can take out, right? And you'll be surprised at how much you can take out. But the more that you take out, the more you're leaving to the reader to do some work as well. I feel like that I have found makes a story a lot stronger.
Yeah, I agree. I think Hemingway in particular was a master of like nuance and like not saying too much. There's a story I've taught to like college students called Hills Like White Elephants. You read that one?
No, I haven't read that one. I've read a lot of Hemingway, but
Well, it's just a little short one, and the whole thing is just like a conversation at a train station between a man and a woman. You don't know their names or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're having this conversation, and it's an old story, right? So, and they mention this white elephants, and they're having this kind of tense conversation. It's not even clear, and it's just a little short thing. But they never really say what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of no one saying anything, and then it's over, right? It's just so classic.
That's
like it's strong. The kids all get it. Like they like completely get it.
Yeah, I mean that is basically classic Hemingway. It reminds me of A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, which I talk about that sometimes in workshops or in courses, and right, there's like not that much happening. Like the story could completely go over your head if you're a green writer, still wet behind the ears. It's just an old guy who goes into a cafe, and he's kind of just doesn't want to go. And eventually they close up the place and he leaves. And it's mostly a conversation between the two waiters. You have to do the work as the reader of that story to get the meaning out of it. And Hemingway was, I think, an early master of that. And what I also appreciate from Hemingway is like the super clean writing and the deceptive simplicity of his writing. And I don't know, it's something I've tried to, I try to write in that way often. I think that simplicity is usually best for what I'm writing.
Well, when I teach writing, like whatever type of writing, like I usually just teach, like freshman writing. It's like composition, various essays, stuff like that, right? I do insist on simplicity, that as a rule, for everyone to remember. When in doubt, you always want to go simple. And so, yeah, I think simplicity is good. And there's a time for like long conjunctive sentences, and there's a time for like short, blunt sentences. So
Agreed.
So it's not like, one over the other as a style, but in general, go with the simple. Yeah, because as you were saying, it's like simplicity helps you to get the point across. I remember earlier you had talked about it, and I was remembering that story I wrote in the beginning for McElroy's class that he actually kind of liked. He liked the dialect, he liked the effort and everything in it. But it was super melodramatic. Everybody was telling me it's meat pies and it's melodrama. And it was because, I thought people needed to know every step of the drama, right? Like at that time, I just spelled every little detail out for people.
Yeah.
But then later you realize they don't need those details. I mean, even just a vague memory of something is enough.
I mean, that's kind of the beauty in what Hemingway does, and what I try to do when I try to write that way is, you can often say um, way more than you thought you could with less, and that's it makes so much sense when you're writing fiction. It makes yeah, I agree with you when I teach. I tell students, like, most often, if you write um, simpler sentences, and sometimes people confuse simpler sentences with like simpler ideas. You can take complex ideas and you can make multiple sentences that can equal that idea, right? I'm not saying simplify your ideas. I'm saying because a lot of students have difficulty with like being understood, writing clearly, getting their point across. And especially if they're writing an argumentative paper, um, the simplicity just allows them to get their point across in a cleaner, more effective way. And that's how they learn about like word economy and stuff like that. So yeah, it's kind of like just being a magician of words, right? Like there's an art to saying more with less, and how much, or in this case fewer, right? Because we're talking about words. So there's like an art to using like fewer words, and then and then it's about how few words you can use to convey complex, interesting ideas, emotions, that we try to do in fiction. It's not something that you want to do all the time, right? I agree with you. There's a time and there's a place. Um, it certainly depends on the character. If there's a character who's narrating, a specific character in the story who's narrating, then certainly depends on if that character would write or think in that way. But yeah. Would you recommend the MFA experience to or an MFA program for a writer, or does it depend like on what his or her goals are, or what do you think?
I don't know if I would recommend an MFA program, but again, it's two different baskets. A lot of people that want to do an MFA, they can afford it. So, but a lot of people would like to, and they probably can't. So I don't really recommend it for people that don't feel that they can afford it. If you don't feel that you can afford it, then I feel like there are a lot of other ways to learn writing and to just like practice writing. Because even if you take a program, it doesn't mean that you would have a book or something finished that is going to give you a career necessarily immediately. It takes time to mature as a writer, and you're going to be doing that maturing anyway. So I don't know. I think with the cost of MFA programs, and they're rarely just like free for anybody. I think that there are a lot of other good writing programs you can get into. I've done things like taken a course, like I took a course at NYU, and then when the course was over, me and the classmates started our own online workshop.
Nice.
So it was a workshop, so it was like getting the same thing. We just don't have the instructor, but the instructor wasn't that great anyway. But yeah, I mean, like there are a lot of other ways, and there are a lot of people that want to workshop. Now that we have Zoom, actually workshopping is a lot more accessible than it used to be. Now that everybody's workshopping on Zoom, so like workshops that I used to do in person are now on Zoom, and because of that, we can have like amazing guests all the time. we never used to have, or it was like very rare. But now they can just zoom in and stuff. So yeah, so I think that especially if you want to write fiction, you know, there are a lot of things that you can do to get better. And there are people who are professors or they're teaching at really great schools who only have a bachelor's, but they wrote a book.
Yeah.
So there's that as well. Some people want to go to a program because they feel like they want to be part of a community and they feel like that will help them. You know, there's some truth in that sometimes. And other people just want to be in something because they don't know where their life is going and they want to like just do something that helps them figure it out and gives them something productive to do while they're figuring out their next steps in life. And so, yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I personally had a weird experience when I got my MFA, but I was having a really weird time in my life already. But I was like the third category of person who was like, oh, my life is like chaotic, so let me go to school. It will just give me something to focus on as kind of like an escape, actually. I've always seen like school as like a way to get confidence as opposed to like a drag on me or my life or my resources. I've viewed it more as a way to build my own confidence. But not everybody sees it like that, you know? So I guess it just depends on one's motives, but you know, most people I know are not making a fortune after their MFA. Even if they have published a book, even if they did get a job, like a tenure track position. I know a few people that have done that, not a lot actually. And even then, it's kind of like a lot of people have to go to like the middle of nowhere for their job. You know, I mean, that's the reality. If you want a tenure track position, you might have to go to like Urbana, Illinois, or Idaho, or whatever random places, because it's very competitive in New York City, obviously, for any position anywhere. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I guess it just depends. And obviously it depends on every person, but I do think, you know, writing is not, an MFA is not medical school. And if you figure out less expensive ways to learn how to define your craft, or even if you do it on your own, or you build up workshops with people that you've taken random classes with, or you found online, you can get your education. The books that they give you to read are the same books that you can read anywhere. Right? You can find a syllabus for a class online and you can literally read everything that's on the syllabus. And you can get the same benefits from it, really. So yeah, I don't think it's really necessary for people to spend a lot of money on that.
I agree. There are many. It certainly depends on what your goals are. I mean, one of the reasons I did it is because I wanted to teach. As you alluded to, it's hard to get a tenure track position with just an MFA. You know, it certainly depends on, you know, your notoriety and your acclaim and what you publish and so forth. But that it's kind of hard. Even though the MFA is considered like a terminable degree, you know, that's where, as a writer, especially a fiction writer or poet, tends to be where you would drop off academically. Although there are creative writing programs, creative writing PhDs across the country. But they're rare. It's still a new thing. And obviously, yeah, it's like a thing that you don't need. I mean, there's this thing in academia where it's like, the PhD is like the traditional route to a tenure track position. And, that's kind of, it's not surprising that in academia, they want you to go to school for, for a very long time. But it's, for a writer, I mean, it's kind of crazy to think, you have to get a PhD in creative writing to get a tenure track position. But
you don't, you just have to write a book. And
right.
So I think the education is like a substitute for the book. It's, people that are like, oh, I need time, I need to insulate myself in an environment and work my way toward writing this or developing this or whatever, immerse myself in it before I can do it. So I think that's probably why people want to do it. But I will say one good thing about the PhD would be that PhDs are covered by the department and not by, they're covered. So that's actually a better situation than an MFA, because you could then more likely get your tuition fully covered, where MFAs tend to be really spotty in terms of how much the department is willing to pay.
All right. So let's I think it'd be cool to talk about some of your work, whatever you want to talk about. And I can't help but notice that, something jumping out at me to talk about, and that's your award-winning one-act play, Baby Teeth.
So I wrote a play called Baby Teeth. It was pretty good. Had a lot of potential, good response from the audience, produced it a few times. And then I developed it into a short film, which is different. It's adapting it. There are some changes, some significant changes. The approach for a film, the mood in a film, like the mood in the film version was quite different from the mood in the play version by necessity. Just wouldn't work, the same tone. Because like with a play, there's like an interaction, a direct interaction with the audience. And so, so the play version was like very playful. And because I know that, you can get a laugh right then out of the audience, and you can use various things to do it. Whereas doing the same kind of tone in a film has like a very kind of like nouveau comedy avant-garde vibe, like all those weird like John Malkovich-y type things. And, they're like comedies, but they're like strange comedies. And so so I didn't really want to, so it was like a decision, like how do I act? I had to like really think about how I can change this into a film without coming off as like kitschy, and just how to do it, in the best way. Because like I said, the vibe is just different when the audience is right there versus when they're like watching at home.
Mm-hmm. What did it win? The Oregon Film Festival? Short film. I'm sorry, the Oregon Short Film Festival 2021 award?
Yeah, I won the award category for that particular festival. So I won the dark comedy short screenplay category.
Got it.
For that one. and then I also like placed in some other festivals, or was just selected for a few other festivals. Always in the dark comedy category.
Mhm.
So that's my category.
I enjoyed dark comedy as well. So who are some of your go-to references for dark comedy? And yeah, just maybe describe like the inspiration that you get from them.
So I'm actually pretty careful about what I take in from other people. I don't want to copy people's work, or like, because I used to be, when like before I was really like head first in this thing, I used to feel like I would like steal other people's ideas because I just didn't feel original. And I think I just like kind of regurgitated other ideas a lot. You know, I didn't know, I had no sense of originality. And I really had to just like turn off the TV, stop taking in any kind of like consumer culture, slow down even on the artistic culture I was taking in, taking different types, taking less music, less trendy stuff, whatever. And it took a while, like before my own voice started to come out. But I know that like dark comedy is a thing that's growing, and to the point that like now they have the dramedy category when they didn't have it like 10 years ago even, I think. So as like a dominant category. But yeah, so it's so like, I know like, so Jordan Peele, I've seen a couple of his movies, and he's doing dark comedy that's weird. And I would say that's what mine is, because there was like dark comedy, like, you know, like I remember this movie Shallow Hal. Remember this movie?
Yeah.
There's been a couple movies with a similar concept where like the protagonist doesn't realize what they're seeing is not really accurate or whatever. And so, you know, that was like dark comedy. And I wrote this story called The Aardvark a long time ago. And I guess like in my mind, that kind of thing was kind of similar. But I felt like that style back then, because like Shallow Hal was what, like 15 years ago? And I feel like at least, and I feel like that style back then of dark comedy was lighter than the dark comedy that's coming out now. Like, I feel like today what's happening is because of like the accessibility of the internet, it's been like 20 years everybody has had, especially since 2008, the internet changed a lot. And, you know, everybody knows everybody's innermost feelings. They know what an asshole everybody is, and they know what everybody really thinks. And, you know, I think most people's perception of like humanity has gone down a little just because of all that, just because we know so much about each other. And so I think that's kind of driving this acceleration into dark comedy, and how dark comedy is becoming darker and darker, because it's like, and especially for me as well, like I'm writing comedy because I need to find a way to put something playful on the incredibly tragic things that are going through my mind and that we need to examine. Because if we only like, I mean, I love inspiring stories, but like I'm trying to write something that's inspiring, but also like, you know, at least with dark comedy, like I'm trying to find the humor in the tragedy. Yeah. And so like I feel like that's what Jordan Peele's doing. And I think that's why we're seeing dark comedy accelerating in a direction that's much darker. It's much more political. It's much more, it's more gory. Like it's like there's a blend of kind of like horror and comedy. Like I even call it psychological horror comedy. It's kind of like what I do. I consider it kind of a psychologically horrifying comedy. Okay. It's so psychological that you may not realize it's horrifying until you're like in it. And that's the idea, I think, with all this new stuff, because that's what I see Jordan Peele doing. It's what I see, what's his name? Sorry, I can't say his name properly. Bong Joon-ho. Bong Joon-ho, who the Korean director, Parasite, number of other movies. And it's just, similar concepts, like, with that movie Parasite, it's dealing with classism, whiteism, not Caucasianism, but just like lightism. And like, as well as there was like this beautiful ode in that film to the kind of diaspora of Koreans and Asians into like other political territories. And so not everybody picked that up, but I picked that up, and that's something that this particular director always has, like, at least somewhere, like, quietly laid into the film, which is a reflection, of Koreans being separated from each other, and how deeply and emotionally felt that is. So I think that it's really cool to like be doing anything in this vein, which is very contemporary, and it's something that's changing and evolving, and it's a reflection of this heightened state of both like tragedy and comedy that we all are aware of, looking around and listening to everything that's happening in the last 20 years as we like take this kind of digital ride together.
Music for Gymnog Pod, provided by Marcos de la Guagua. Guagua is spelled G-U-A-G-U-A. Art by Seco1844. Seco is S-E-K-O. My website, which contains news, bios, social media links, a bibliography, a blog, a podcast page, and a press page, is jamesnoguera.com. Noguera is N-O-G-U-E-R-A. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Jimnog. That's J-I-M-N-O-G. Or you can support the show on patreon.com/Jimnog. And thank you for your interest.